there's no reason why we shouldn't be preparing a new search and planning for that.
So if we were to send a search party out there now, they'd be able to find it?
It will only take one more search and we will find it.
For over a decade, the world has wondered, where is MH370 really? Millions followed the mysterious disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people, vanishing without a trace over the Indian Ocean. Official searches scoured thousands of square kilometers, uncovering only scattered debris. But now, retired British engineer Richard Godfrey claims he has solved the puzzle. Using faint radio signals no one else considered, he not only pinpointed the missing plane's location, but brought proof that stunned the world. What did he find, and where did he find it? The night MH370 vanished. The night of March 7, 2014, at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a Boeing 777-200ER, departed for China. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran pilot with 18,000 flight hours, guided the aircraft. Beside him sat First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, younger and less experienced, but capable. In the cabin behind them, 227 passengers from 15 different nations settled into their seats, most expecting to wake up in China. Families traveling together, business executives reviewing presentations, tourists clutching guidebooks. All 239 souls aboard were bound for what should have been an unremarkable flight. The initial climb proceeded flawlessly. Air traffic controllers tracked the plane's steady ascent, watching the blip on their radar screens move northeast across the Malay Peninsula. At 1 a.m., MH370 reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Everything appeared perfectly normal. At 1:19 a.m., Captain Zahari's voice crackled through the radio one final time. "Good night, Malaysian 370, he said, acknowledging the handoff from Malaysian to Vietnamese air traffic control. His tone was routine, unremarkable, giving no hint of the catastrophe about to unfold. Those 5 words would become the last anyone would hear from Flight 370. 2 minutes later, the plane's transponder went silent. The device that broadcast MH370's identity, altitude, and speed to civilian air traffic control simply stopped transmitting. On radar screens in Kuala Lumpur and Ho Chi Minh City, the aircraft vanished, as if it had been erased from the sky. Controllers waited for the plane to appear on Vietnamese radar. Minutes passed. Nothing. Where was MH370? What civilian controllers couldn't see, Malaysian military radar could. At 1:21 a.m., an unidentified aircraft appeared on military screens, making a sharp turn, not toward Beijing, but back across Malaysia, heading west. The plane crossed back over the Malay Peninsula, flying over Penang Island and out toward the Strait of Malacca. This wasn't the path of a jetliner bound for China. This was something else entirely. As dawn broke over Southeast Asia, families waiting at Beijing Capital International Airport grew increasingly anxious. Flight 370 should have landed hours ago. Airport officials offered vague reassurances, but behind closed doors, panic was setting in. Malaysia Airlines released a brief statement confirming the plane was missing. The search for answers was about to begin, but the mystery of that terrible night would prove far deeper, stranger, and more perplexing than anyone could possibly imagine. Ghost signals and the official story. As search teams scrambled to locate the missing aircraft, investigators made a startling discovery that would reshape the entire investigation. While MH370 had vanished from radar, it hadn't disappeared completely. The plane had continued flying for hours after its transponder went dark, leaving behind a trail of electronic breadcrumbs that would eventually lead searchers to one of the most remote corners of the planet. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Inmarsat, a British satellite communications company. Their satellite orbiting over the Indian Ocean had automatically recorded a series of electronic handshakes with MH370's communication system. Engineers at Inmarsat realized these seemingly meaningless pings contained crucial information. By analyzing the burst timing offset, the tiny delay in signal transmission, they could calculate the distance between the satellite and the aircraft at each handshake. This created a series of arcs across the globe, curved lines representing every possible location the plane could have been at specific times. Each arc stretched thousands of miles, but together they formed a pattern. Scientists and investigators combined the satellite handshakes with known fuel capacity, weather conditions, and aircraft performance data. Their calculations pointed to a final location along what became known as the seventh arc, the last ring of possible positions corresponding to that 8:19 a.m. handshake. This arc curved through the southern Indian Ocean, approximately 1,500 miles west of Australia, one of the most isolated and treacherous regions on Earth. The official narrative began to crystallize around a grim theory, a deliberate act, likely by someone in the cockpit. The sharp westward turn, the disabled transponder, the methodical flight along airways until reaching the open ocean, all suggested intentional human action. Investigators theorized the plane had become a ghost flight, continuing on autopilot after whoever diverted it either became incapacitated or chose to let it fly until fuel exhaustion. The final descent would have been swift and catastrophic, ending in a high-speed impact with the ocean. Each piece was analyzed, authenticated, and confirmed. They belonged to MH370. The wreckage told a story of violent impact, shredded metal, and sudden destruction. Yet the main body of the aircraft, the fuselage containing answers, flight recorders, and closure for grieving families, remained hidden somewhere beneath millions of square miles of dark, cold water. But the question haunting investigators was becoming impossible to ignore. If the official search area was correct, why had the most extensive ocean search in history found absolutely nothing? The failed search and its flaws. The hunt for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 became the most expensive and technologically advanced search operation in aviation history. Governments pooled resources, deploying ships, aircraft, submarines, and autonomous underwater vehicles into the vast southern Indian Ocean. The price tag soared past $200 million as teams from Australia, Malaysia, China, and private contractors scoured an area larger than many countries. Yet, despite the unprecedented effort, the ocean stubbornly refused to surrender its secrets. The absence of wreckage in the designated search zone exposed fundamental problems with the investigation's assumptions. The entire operation hinged on interpretations of satellite data that required multiple layers of educated guessing. Scientists had made assumptions about the plane's autopilot settings, fuel consumption rates, and flight management system behavior. They assumed the aircraft had flown straight and level after its last radar contact, maintaining a consistent course until fuel exhaustion. They assumed the engines had flamed out simultaneously, triggering a rapid, uncontrolled descent. Each assumption seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they formed a house of cards. By early 2017, authorities officially suspended the underwater search. The ocean had won, or so it seemed. The failure forced a difficult acknowledgement. Traditional methods had reached their limits. If MH370 was ever to be found, investigators would need to think differently, look in unexpected places, and embrace approaches that conventional wisdom had overlooked. What the world needed was someone willing to challenge every assumption and pursue leads others had dismissed as impossible. Theories and contradictions. As the official search faltered, investigators clung to their primary theory: deliberate pilot action, followed by a controlled ditching or uncontrolled crash. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah became the focus of intense scrutiny. Authorities examined his personal life, his flight simulator at home. The physical evidence from recovered debris deepened the mystery. Aviation experts examined every piece of wreckage that washed ashore, and their findings painted a picture of catastrophic, high-energy impact. The flaperon showed damage consistent with the aircraft hitting the water at tremendous speed and force. Other wing fragments arrived shredded, their trailing edges torn apart, metal twisted and mangled. Most tellingly, the flaps were retracted, not extended as they would be if a pilot were attempting a controlled emergency landing on water. Everything about the wreckage screamed violent, sudden destruction, not a carefully executed ditching. These contradictions created an impossible puzzle. If the pilot had hijacked his own plane and planned to crash it, Why fly for 6 hours on autopilot if he intended a controlled ditching to sink the aircraft intact and hide evidence? Why did the debris show such violent impact damage? If the plane was in an uncontrolled dive, who or what had been flying it for the previous hours? What became increasingly clear was that solving the MH370 mystery would require more than reanalyzing the same satellite data and searching the same ocean zones. Someone needed to bring an entirely fresh perspective, a method so unconventional that established authorities had never considered it, that someone was about to emerge from the most unlikely of places. Enter Richard Godfrey. Richard Godfrey was not the kind of person anyone expected to solve aviation's greatest mystery. He wasn't a government investigator, an airline executive, or even an active aerospace engineer anymore. He was a retired British engineer living quietly in Frankfurt, Germany, spending his days tinkering with data, solving puzzles, and pursuing intellectual challenges that kept his analytical mind sharp. But the disappearance of MH370 had gripped him in a way few things ever had. While the world moved on and official searches wound down, Godfrey remained obsessed, convinced that somewhere in the vast ocean of available data lay a pattern everyone else had missed. The breakthrough moment came when Godfrey stumbled upon something called USPR, the Weak Signal Propagation Reporter Network. This obscure corner of amateur radio technology had existed for years, largely unknown outside ham radio circles. Radio enthusiasts around the world transmitted low-power signals that other enthusiasts received and logged, creating a global web of communication data used primarily to study how radio waves traveled through the atmosphere. The signals were incredibly faint, often too weak for conventional receivers, yet the network captured them, time-stamped them, and archived everything in publicly accessible databases. Godfrey's engineer's mind saw possibilities others had missed. Radio waves travel in relatively straight lines, but they can be disrupted by objects in their path. Large metal objects, say a massive Boeing 777 flying at 35,000 feet, would create detectable disturbances in radio signal propagation. The plane's aluminum body would reflect, refract, and scatter radio waves, leaving fingerprints in the data. If someone could analyze the USPR network's archived transmissions from the night MH370 disappeared, those disturbances might reveal the aircraft's actual flight path across the Indian Ocean. He threw himself into the work with singular focus. His home office became mission control, computers running custom analysis software around the clock, walls covered with maps and data printouts. He reached out to USPR network operators, downloaded years of archived signal reports, and began the painstaking process of filtering millions of data points. The question that drove him forward, the one that kept him working late into countless nights, was deceptively simple. Could faint whispers of radio waves, scattered across the globe and archived by hobbyists, really reveal the truth about a ghost plane that had eluded the world's most sophisticated search technologies? The answer, Godfrey was about to discover, would stun everyone tracing the invisible trail. Godfrey began by writing custom software to process the enormous dataset. The challenge wasn't just volume, it was separating genuine aircraft-related anomalies from the countless false positives generated by solar storms, atmospheric disturbances, equipment malfunctions, and random interference. Slowly, patterns emerged from the chaos. Godfrey identified 130 distinct anomalies in USPR signals crossing the Indian Ocean during the night of March 7 and early morning of March 8, 2014. These weren't random glitches scattered across time and space. They formed a coherent sequence, a breadcrumb trail that moved steadily across the ocean in a way that matched no natural phenomenon. The timing was precise, the geographical distribution logical, and most remarkably, the early anomalies aligned perfectly with the military radar track showing MH370's westward turn across the Malay Peninsula. Mapping these 130 anomalies created a flight path that told a complete story. The track showed the aircraft turning west after its transponder went dark, exactly as military radar had recorded. It curved southwest over the Andaman Sea, then arced southward into the vast emptiness of the southern Indian Ocean. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't random interference. This was an aircraft leaving electronic footprints across thousands of miles of ocean. The geometry of the signal disruptions provided additional validation. When an aircraft passes between a radio transmitter and receiver, it creates a characteristic pattern of interference. Signals don't just disappear, they refract around the obstacle, creating detectable signatures in timing and frequency. Godfrey found these refraction fingerprints throughout his dataset, confirming that the anomalies weren't caused by atmospheric conditions or equipment problems, but by a large physical object moving through the radio wave's path. The physics made sense. The math checked out. The pattern was consistent across multiple independent signal paths. When Godfrey finally published his findings, the response was immediate and polarized. Some experts praised the innovative approach and the mathematical sophistication of his analysis. Others raised pointed questions about the reliability of using amateur radio data for precision aircraft tracking. But the real test of Godfrey's work wouldn't come from academic debate or peer review. It would come from whether independent scientists could validate his conclusions and whether his coordinates could finally lead searchers to the wreckage that had eluded the world for years. Validation and global impact. The scientific community's initial reaction to Richard Godfrey's SPR analysis ranged from cautious interest to outright dismissal. Aviation experts and oceanographers had grown weary of amateur theories about MH370, having witnessed countless unfounded claims over the years. The breakthrough in credibility came when researchers at the University of Liverpool subjected Godfrey's coordinates to rigorous statistical analysis. Using oceanographic drift modeling, they simulated how debris from an aircraft crash at his proposed location would disperse across the Indian Ocean over the following years. The models incorporated ocean currents, wind patterns, seasonal variations, and the buoyancy characteristics of aircraft components. Their conclusion stunned the aviation world. There was a 74% probability that wreckage would be found at Godfrey's coordinates, significantly higher than any other proposed location. The drift patterns aligned remarkably well with where actual MH370 debris had washed ashore on distant coastlines. Further validation came from an unexpected flight test conducted with a Boeing 777. Engineers equipped the aircraft with equipment to monitor the signal disruptions during flight, creating a real-time experiment to test whether the technology actually worked, as Godfrey claimed. The results were striking. The aircraft's passage through radio signal paths created detectable anomalies that could be tracked and mapped. The refraction signatures, timing disturbances, and signal strength variations all matched Godfrey's theoretical predictions. SPR tracking wasn't just a mathematical exercise, it was a functional technology that could reveal aircraft positions through archived radio data. The most challenging objection involved the absence of wreckage at the initial hotspot. If Godfrey was right, why hadn't previous searches found anything near his coordinates? The answer lay in the search area's vastness and the limitations of previous scanning technology. Even a narrow miss of a few kilometers could mean the difference between detecting wreckage and scanning empty seabed. Additionally, Godfrey's location sat in extremely deep water with complex underwater terrain that could hide debris in valleys, canyons, or beneath sediment layers. Then came the revelation that would transform the entire investigation. Independent debris. Drift analysis, conducted by multiple research teams using different oceanographic models, converged on an astonishing conclusion. Major parts of MH370 had traveled much farther than anyone had anticipated. The analysis traced debris paths not just to the African coastline where wing fragments had been found, but incredibly, to Hrabove, Ukraine. The discovery stunned aviation experts worldwide. Pieces of the aircraft had apparently drifted across vast oceanic and continental distances, carried by complex current systems and human activity, eventually arriving thousands of miles from the crash site. This unexpected finding reshaped everything investigators thought they knew about the wreckage distribution. It validated Godfrey's crash location while explaining why debris had appeared in seemingly impossible locations. The convergence of SPR tracking data, satellite analysis, drift modeling, and physical debris discovery created a comprehensive picture that was becoming impossible to dismiss. The question now wasn't whether Godfrey's work had merit, it was whether anyone had the resources, technology, and determination to mount one final search in the precise location his painstaking analysis had revealed the technology to finish the search. With renewed hope and compelling scientific evidence pointing to a specific location, the Malaysian government made a pivotal decision: authorize one more search operation, but this time using cutting-edge technology that hadn't existed during the original attempts. They turned to Ocean Infinity, a Texas-based marine robotics company that had already conducted a previous search for MH370 in 2018. This time, however, Ocean Infinity arrived with upgraded equipment, refined strategies, and Richard Godfrey's precise coordinates guiding their efforts. The centerpiece of the new search was Ocean Infinity's fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles, particularly the advanced Armada 7806 series. These weren't the tethered submersibles of earlier searches that required constant connection to surface vessels. The new AUVs operated independently, diving untethered to depths exceeding 6,000 meters, deep enough to reach the ocean floor in even the most challenging parts of the search zone. Each vehicle carried sophisticated side-scan sonar, capable of detecting objects as small as aircraft components buried partially in sediment or nestled in underwater crevices. Ocean Infinity's search strategy focused on a carefully defined zone of approximately 15,000 square kilometers, centered on Godfrey's coordinates. This area represented the highest probability region based on the convergence of SPR data, satellite analysis, fuel calculations, and drift modeling. Rather than scanning the enormous seventh arc in its entirety, the new search concentrated resources on the specific hotspot where multiple lines of evidence intersected. The operational efficiency was remarkable. Ocean Infinity estimated that their fleet could scan the entire 15,000 square kilometer target zone in approximately 1 month of continuous operations, weather permitting, and assuming no major technical issues, the search could move from authorization to completion faster than any previous attempt. The technological capability existed. The location had been identified with unprecedented precision. The resources were committed. All that remained was for the ocean to surrender what it had guarded for so long. But even if the wreckage was found, would it reveal the truth about why MH370 disappeared? Or would it simply replace one mystery with another? The human story. Behind every data point, every satellite ping, and every piece of drifting debris were human lives. 239 individuals who boarded a plane expecting to reach their destination and never did. They were mothers and fathers, children and grandparents, artists and engineers, each carrying dreams, responsibilities, and people who loved them. Richard Godfrey represented a different kind of human story, one of obsession, persistence, and courage in the face of institutional skepticism. He had sacrificed thousands of hours to a puzzle that wasn't his to solve, driven by nothing more than intellectual curiosity and empathy for suffering families. He risked professional ridicule by championing an unconventional methodology that established experts dismissed. Yet he persevered through 3 years of painstaking analysis, motivated by the belief that truth could be found if someone was willing to look hard enough in unexpected places. The scientists, engineers, and search teams involved represented humanity at its best. Expertise deployed in service of compassion, technology harnessed for the purpose of bringing closure. They worked not for glory or compensation, but because finding MH370 mattered deeply on a human level. The stakes were never really about aircraft or technology. They were about honoring the dead, comforting the living, and proving that even in the face of impossible odds, human determination and ingenuity could overcome the deepest mysteries and bring light to the darkest questions. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.